Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers, and welcome to the 14 Pillars, the Ahlul Bayt alayhum assalam for everyone, our Muharram special here on Imam Hussein TV, where today we're discussing the very important topic of Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha. My name is Sayyida Mahdi, and I'm once again honored to be joined by Sister Dua. Sister, assalamu alaikum and welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you, Sister, once again for joining us as we continue our Muharram special of the 14 Pillars, discussing Imam Hussein alayhi salam in this holy month. In particular, we look at the perfect example of courage and patience, Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha. Now, Sayyida Zainab is not just there for us Shias, she's there for all of mankind, women and male and female, Shias, non-Shia, Muslims, non-Muslims. She is the perfect example of courage, of faith, of strength, of loyalty, of patience, of complete devotion and submissiveness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Imam of her time. Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha, at the tender age of 6, she lost her mother. Sayyida Fatima salamullahi alayha, her shahadat took place when Sayyida Zainab was only but a few years old. But in those first few years of her life, she learnt so much from her mother. She grew up in the lap of her mother and the father. Imam Ali alayhi salam and Sayyida Fatima salamullahi alayha together were instrumental in bringing up Sayyida Zainab, especially in those early few years of her life, which molded her to be so strong on the day of Ashura. She learnt patience from Sayyida Fatima salamullahi alayha. When Sayyida Fatima did the sermon of Fadak, Sayyida Zainab witnessed her mother quoting from the Holy Quran, and we see this, how Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha does this in the courtyard of Kufa and Sham. Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha was only but a few years old. She was only, narrations tell us, 4 years old when the event of Mubahila took place, and she saw her mother represent the Muslims against the Christians of Najran. She sees her mother when the shahadat of Hazrat Muhsin takes place. She sees her father being dragged onto the street. She sees the shahadat of her mother, Sayyida Fatima salamullahi alayha. So these events in Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha's early years of her life were important to give her that patience and that strength that she needed on the day of Ashura, that she needed to be the backbone of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, to save Islam from the 11th of Muharram onwards, to be the support to the women and the children, to Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. She was known as Al-Fadila, the virtuous lady, because of her jihad for Islam, because of her service to Islam. She was known as al-Masaib, the mother of misfortunes, because of everything she saw. She saw her children being made shaheed. She saw her brothers being made shaheed. She saw her nephews being made shaheed. She saw the tents being put on fire. She saw the women running from tent to try and save their hijab. She gathered the women and children at night. She protected Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. Even on the treacherous journey from Karbala to Kufa to Sham, back to Karbala and back to Medina, she was the backbone of that camp, and she was there to protect Islam. So we open up today's discussion, and our first question we look at, what was Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha's role in Karbala? And why is she so pivotal and so instrumental to Imam Hussein alayhi salam?
You know, the Quran and the Sunnah brought to us, the best examples and the best role models, and they are Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wassalam. And Zainab alayhi salam, she participated in the divine project of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, her and Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Today is very impossible to mention Imam Hussein alayhi salam and not mention Lady Zainab. It's impossible to pay a visitation to Imam Hussein alayhi salam and not remember Lady Zainab alayhi salam. The first thing that comes to your mind is Lady Zainab alayhi salam. When you pay Lady Zainab alayhi salam a visitation in her grave, the first thing that comes to your mind is Imam Hussein alayhi salam. There's even a special visitation that you visit Imam Hussein alayhi salam on the day of the martyrdom of Lady Zainab alayhi salam. And that shows you that they are two, cause for one, they are two partners to one cause, and you cannot split them apart. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he gave covenant to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he will participate in this project. And Lady Zainab alayha salam likewise gave a covenant to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before this earth was created that she will participate in this divine project. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose her as a woman to complete that project, because Imam Hussein alayhi salam began this project and she completed it. And if it wasn't for her, this project would not have remained, because she was the media of Karbala. And if we actually read in the Ziyarat Warith, we would say, Assalamu alayka ya waritha al-anbiya, Assalamu alayka ya waritha Adam. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he is, the successor of the prophets. He consoled all the prophets for what they have encountered and what they have faced from misfortunes and calamities. And this is what it means when you say, Assalamu alayka, oh, peace be upon you, who you've inherited. Inherited what from the prophets? The calamities and the misfortunes. And Imam Hussein alayhi salam and Lady Zainab, because they are two partners, they all faced these calamities that all the prophets of Ulul Azm, the prophets that are most approved, and they added to that calamity, and endurance. For example, Zainab alayha salam, whatever she endured, no man today can endure. No man can handle what Lady Zainab alayhi salam handled with bravery and patience. If you come, for example, to Adam. Now, Adam is not from Ulul Azm, but let's discuss him. Adam, he was deprived from paradise, and he mourned and he cried, and he was named al-Bakka'in, from the mourners and the criers. He shed tears. Lady Zainab alayhi salam, she was deprived from two paradises. The paradise of her grandfather Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, the presence of Rasulullah, and the presence of her brother, the master of martyrs, Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And she also mourned and she also cried. And then you would realize that Adam, he was afflicted by his son Habil and Qabil. And Zainab alayhi salam, she was afflicted by all her family, her children, her siblings, her nephews, all her family before Karbala and even after Karbala. She was afflicted by their misfortunes and the calamities. So she added whatever she experienced, Adam did not even experience it. And she consoled him with these tragedies. If you would actually look at Ibrahim al-Khalil, he was, afflicted by his son Ismail. And that he was going to slaughter his son, but he didn't taste the bitterness of seeing his son slaughtered. Allah replaced him. وَفَدَيْنَاهُ بِذَبْحٍ عَظِيمٍ. We have ransomed him with a greater ransom. Ibrahim did not even taste that bitterness of seeing his son being slaughtered. She saw not only her children, but her siblings, all of them, Imam Hussein, Al-Abbas, even her nephews slaughtered, and she tasted that bitterness of seeing her family members slaughtered in Karbala. If you would see Ibrahim again, and Nar Namrud, the fire of Namrud that burned Ibrahim. Ibrahim's body did not even flame into fire. Ya Nar, kuni bardan wa salaman ala Ibrahim. Oh, you fire, be cool and peaceful on Ibrahim. Ibrahim did not burn from that fire of Namrud. However, Lady Zainab alayhi salam, her body burned. Her legs caught fire and they burned. She felt that burning fire. The narration narrates, and you'll find this in Maqatil Imam Hussein alayhi salam, that Zainab alayhi salam, when they burned the tents, she entered the tent of Imam al-Sajjad. And she said to him, Yabna akhi, ya baqiyat al-madhin. O you who have remained from those who have left. قد أضرموا النار في مضارمنا فما رأيكم فينا. They have flamed fire and burnt our tents. What shall we do? He says, Amma Zainab alaykum bil firar. Oh, Auntie Zainab, flee. Flee where? In the desert. A desert of what? Filled with enemies. The narration says everyone fled in the desert except Zainab. She was standing. If you would realize also in Maqatil Imam Hussein alayhi salam, it says the narration that Mukhtar ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, every time he caught someone who had, participated in Ashura and killing from the enemy of Umar ibn Sa'ad, every time he would catch someone, he would tell them, what did you do on Ashura? To find out, what did they do? What was their task? So Khuwali, they caught a man named Khuwali. They said to him, what did you do on the day of Ashura? He said, I saw the tents burning and the woman fleeing away in the desert, except for one lady. She was standing. She would enter the tent and exit, and the fire was flaming on her body, her legs. And she would look left, she would look right, she would look to the skies, she would hit her hands and say, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. She would enter the tent and she would exit. I came close to her. I said to her, Amat Allah, ala tanzurina ila nar wa qad akhadhat thiyabuki. Oh, you lady, have you not seen this flaming fire has caught your feet and your clothing? Why aren't you escaping? She said to him, Ya hadha, oh you man, inna lana alil dakhil hadhihi al-khayma. We have someone who's ill. The tent was burning around the Imam. I don't know if you had the first COVID, when we could not lift our head from the pillow. And every time we'd cough, our bones would crack. And every time we had home remedies, we were sleeping in a mattress, we had medication, and we couldn't lift our head up. Imam Sajjad was that sick, and he was 3 nights thirsty, 3 nights no food. And he had no home remedies. And on top of that, there was a terror and a tragedy, and his father and his siblings were martyred and slaughtered. And the tent now was burning. Lady Zainab couldn't lift him. She didn't know what to do. So he said, I went in and I saw Imam Sajjad sleeping on a nata. Nata is basically a thin leather. So he never had a mattress. He never had a blanket. It was a thin leather. He says, فَأَخَذْتُ نَطْعَ الْإِمَامِ مِنْ تَحْتِهِ. I grabbed that leather from underneath the Imam. And I looked at Zainab and she was standing. And I pulled the veil off her face. And I pulled her earrings. Mukhtar said, what did she say to you? He said, she said to me, may Allah cut off your hands and your legs. قطع الله يديك ورجليك وأحرقك في نار الدنيا قبل الآخرة. May Allah cut these hands off and these legs off, and may you be burnt in the hellfire of this world before the hereafter. Mukhtar cried and he said, لأجيبن دعوة هذه المرأة المظلومة. I will answer her call, answer her dua, cut his hands off, cut his legs off, burn him in the fire. And this shows you that this flaming fire has caught Lady Zainab alayhi salam, and it burned her legs, and it burned her cloak and her clothing. Yet she stood there. Where is Nar Ibrahim from her fire? She consoled him with that fire, but she added on to it because she tasted that burning fire. Ibrahim didn't taste it. Ya nar kuni bardan wa salaman ala Ibrahim. She also consoled Moses alayhi salam. Musa, he was afflicted by Pharaoh. And Musa had enough from Pharaoh that he raised his hands to the sky and he said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I have no more patience for Pharaoh and his disbelief. Drown him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala drowned. Before he even drowns Pharaoh said, Amantu bi Rabbi Musa. I believe in the Lord of Moses. Her enemies did not even believe. They did kufr even to the last minute before they died. For example, you'd come to Jesus. He was attacked by Bani Israel. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replaced him and he lifted him to heaven. She had the cursing and the hitting and taken captive, and she was seated on a camel, and she went through a lot. So if we look and examine every single thing that happened to Lady Zainab alayhi salam, we would examine that she consoled all the prophets, her and Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and she added to it. She endured a lot. And she was a woman who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted her to take this part in Karbala as a female woman. And that was her role, to complete the message of Islam and to revive the message. And that was a covenant made between her and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and she accepted it.
As females, sometimes we don't realize our own inner strength. And we know that there is no tragedy greater than the tragedy that befell upon Imam Hussein alayhi salam on the day of Ashura. There is no day like Ashura, but there is no patience like Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha. And we look at our trials and we look at our tests and we look at when we are going through difficulty in our life and we gain patience and solace from what Imam Hussein alayhi salam went through. And then afterwards, what Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha and Imam Sajjad and the other captives, when they were paraded through the streets of Kufa and Sham, their patience, their humbleness, They're submissive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We learn from them to inspire us, so that when we are going through our own trials and our own tests and our own tribulations in life, there is nothing greater than the trials that Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, Imam Sajjad, and all those who were present at the time went through. And we look at Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha, and we look at that close bond and that close relationship that she has between Imam Hussein and Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha, between Sayyida Zainab and Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam, between Sayyida Zainab and Imam Ali alayhi salam. We said how Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha, she lost her mother Sayyida Fatima salamullahi alayha at the tender age of 6. She became an orphan at that age. She was very close to her brothers. She was very close to her father. She learned a lot from Imam Ali alayhi salam. When Imam Ali alayhi salam moved to Kufa, Sayyida Zainab and Abdullah, her husband, the son of Ja'far al-Tayyar, they moved to Kufa as well. Sayyida Zainab would teach the women in the house, and Imam Ali alayhi salam would go out in the mosque, in the masjid, to teach the people of Kufa. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam has said, "My auntie Zainab, you were learned without being taught, and you have the understanding without being trained." She was given the wisdom from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we call her, she has this minor infallibility because of her wisdom and her knowledge. She was the adornment of her father. Zainab meaning the adornment of her father. She was shielded by her brothers, and she was protected by her brothers. So often now, when we look at history, there isn't, especially in the very early years of Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha, we don't have many narrations about her. There isn't that much written in history about Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha because of her very close relationship with her family and how they protected her. What can we say about this, dear sister?
You know, Bani Umayyah, in the media of Bani Umayyah, they hid everything to do with Lady Zainab alayhi salam, all her history. I mean, a great woman, the greatest lady of Bani Hashim after her mother, Lady Fatima alayhi salam. And she lived up to the age of 60, yet nothing is mentioned and narrated about it. You know, we have disputes in the narratives of when she was born. Some say 14th of Rajab, some say 15th of Rajab. I mean, a great lady like Lady Zainab alayhi salam, there's a couple of narration on the day that she was born. There is a dispute in narratives of where she was buried. Some say in Medina, some say in Egypt, some say in Sham. Now the highest and the most of the narration says in Sham, but there are plenty of narrations. A woman who's great like Lady Zainab alayhi salam, why does the narrations don't tell us exactly where she was buried, exactly what day she was born? We have not much known about her through her adolescence, her childhood, stories about her and her grandfather, her and her mother, her teenage age, what she's done, how was her life like? And this is because Bani Umayyah, they hid everything about Lady Zainab alayhi salam. And there's this book, Akhbar al-Zainabiyat, by Sheikh al-Ubaydali. And al-Ubaydali, he is one of the greatest trustworthy scholars that even our scholars mention about him. For example, Ibn Shahr Ashub, Sheikh al-Mufid, Allam al-Hilli, and Sheikh al-Tusi, all of them narrate about Sheikh al-Ubaydali from his narrations. So he's a trustworthy scholar. In his book that was published recently, in the recent times, named Akhbar al-Zainabiyat, the news of Lady Zainab alayhi salam, he says that Lady Zainab alayhi salam was forced to leave Medina. They forced her out of the city of Medina. And the reason why is because of the rebuke that she had against Yazid and the uprising. She was the media of Karbala. She was there. She narrated whatever happened in Karbala. And she made the people uprise against Yazid's unjust government. And this is why the narration says that she died in the same year, and all the ladies of Ahlul Bayt who were in Karbala died the same year. And this shows us that she was poisoned. This shows us that they were all poisoned. None of them were left, and they made them escape and exit from Medina. They kicked her out. And the narration says she died gharib. She died as, no one knowing her, as her being, alienated, or her, being ghariba and oppressed. This is how she died. And the media of Bani Umayyah worked hard to kill everyone who had information about her. They said, we don't want anyone to know the date that she was born, the date that she died. How she died, nobody knows. Today, even when we commemorate the martyrdom of Lady Zainab alayhi salam, we mention what we know from Karbala. We don't mention how she died because the narrations do not mention to us. It's not because there was no narrations. It's because Bani Umayyah worked on to destroy all these narrations and to destroy and kill anyone who had this knowledge about Lady Zainab alayhi salam. Or else a woman today, public woman, who has been done something very great in history and was, a part of a movement, you would know the date that she was born, the date that she died, history would mention about her childhood, her adolescence, what she's done. Lady Zainab alayhi salam, nothing. It's because they worked so hard to hide the ma'arif and her biography and her history. So that was the first thing. And our scholars say that Lady Zainab alayhi salam, she was such a great woman that she participated in, 4 types of voluntary death, which we will explain. And this kind of death is where you have, the scholars name it a red death, white death, green death, and black death. And the first death was the white death. And that was the death of, having zuhud, self-restraint from food. So it would give cleansing to your soul. And it's to kill your desires, death for your desires, for you desiring to have this food and that food. Ahlul Bayt in general, and even the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, they had self-restraint and zuhud from food. So they did not eat a lot. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, 3 days would pass by that he wouldn't eat. And there were times where he'd place a rock on his stomach and he would tie it up so that his stomach would not have this butterflies and grind from hunger. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would place that rock and he would always be hungry. Imam Ali alayhi salam likewise, he would not only eat only the dates. And sometimes there were days passed by where they're hungry. Lady Fatima likewise. All Ahlul Bayt participated in that death of having self-restraint from food, zuhud in food. 1, to cleanse their soul. 2, to kill the desires, these desires. Lady Zainab alayhi salam, on the day that she was taken captive and she was thrown in, Kharabat al-Sham, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam says, I saw her praying Salat al-Layl, but she was seated. So I said to her, oh Auntie Zainab, mali araki tusallin min julus. Why do I see you seated while you're praying Salat al-Layl? She said to him, Yabna akhi, oh Sajjad, I have no energy from what happened to me in Karbala. And she hasn't eaten for days. Because even when Bani Umayyah, they gave them food, they gave them few. So she had to give her shares to the orphans of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and she starved herself. Lady Zainab alayhi salam is not helpless. She's able to raise her hands to the sky and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a meal from paradise, and Allah will descend an angel with a meal. But she didn't want that. So her ajr, her thawab can be stronger. And this was something a covenant that she made between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to save the message, to add more thawab to this divine project. This is the first death. The second death was the green death, and that was to have, self-restraint from clothing. And this is something Imam Ali alayhi salam practiced a lot until he said, that وَلَقَدْ اسْتَحِيتُ مِنْ رَاقِعِهَا. He would always sew his cloak. He had one clothing, one thobe, that every time he would take it to a sewer and he would sew it, that he said, I'm even shy to even take it back to this person to sew it for me. Lady Zainab alayhi salam, she stayed with one abaya that she wore, the one in Ashura, until she died. She never had only one. And Ahlul Bayt in general, they had wealth and they were not helpless. They were able to pick up the soil and make it gold. And they had a lot of wealth, but they didn't want to. They wanted self-restraint in clothing, zuhud in their clothing as well. Today, if you really want to look at people and see if they're valuable or not, if they have knowledge and who they really are, look at their clothing. If you see someone today who cares so much about what they wear and how they look, you can realize that they're empty inside of them. They have nothing. They have no goals, no knowledge, because this is all they think about. How do I look? How do I dress? I want to buy this. I want to look like this. I'm not perfect enough. I don't look pretty today. I don't look good today. That's all they care about. Ahlul Bayt and Lady Zainab alayhi salam were the best role models that showed us that having self-restraint, zuhud in clothing is because you have knowledge. And the reason why we're here on this world, not just to dress and look nice. Yes, it's nice as well, but they taught us that it's important is the intellect, your worship, everything will remain. And this is something that she had. And Ahlul Bayt in general, they taught themselves the death and the zuhud in their desires of clothing and dressing and stuff like that. Then you have the other death, which is the black death. And that's them hearing cursing from enemies, hatred from enemies, being hit, being hurt. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi was hit more than once. And he practiced that kind of voluntary death. That yes, he will be hurt, he will be hit. Imam Ali likewise. And Zainab alayhi salam, she had the most severe part of endurance of being hurt and hitten. You know, all her body was bruised they hit her all the way from Karbala until Kufa, until Sham, until Medina. She was tortured and hit, and she endured all that pain. And this is something that they volunteered in, experiencing this death so that nothing else would matter other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the religion of Islam. From this, we can learn from Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam a lot of how a great woman she was. Yes, history does not mention to us a lot, but even the few that it mentions to us, we are able to examine and do deep research and understand and actually teach it to ourselves and teach it to our daughters, teach it to the ladies out there, and even teach it to the men.
We often forget, and perhaps we don't realize, that the Imams, the Ahlul Bayt, Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha, everything that they went through was for Allah's pleasure. It was because of Allah's will. They, as the infallibles, have the ability to raise their hands and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help. In fact, when Imam Hussein alayhi salam was being made shaheed, the angels begged Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to go down and help Imam Hussein. It was Imam Hussein who said no to these angels, because this was Imam Hussein's test, and he was being completely submissive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. We forget that they had the power in them to hold up their hands in dua and ask for help, but they didn't take it. Ibn Ziyad, in the courtyard and in Kufa, narrations tell us that he was playing with the head of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and narrations say that he took a stick and he was poking the head of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and he turned to Lady Zainab and he says to her, "What do you say to your Lord who has done this to Hussein?" He's trying to blame Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Lady Zainab turns around to Ibn Ziyad and says, "I saw nothing but beauty." The whole event of Karbala and beyond, from Kufa to Sham, they were shackled, they were chained, they were whipped, they were beaten, they had boiling water thrown upon them, they were pelted, they were made to ride saddleless camels. The way that Sayyida Ruqayya was treated, earrings being pulled out, yet she saw nothing but beauty, because she saw beauty in the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in the courtyard of Yazid, Sayyida Zainab stands up to the tyrants, and again we see her patience and her courage being taught to her from Imam Ali and Sayyida Fatima salamullahi alayha. And we hear Sayyida Zainab, and it's as if Imam Ali is speaking. And she says, all praises to Allah. She thanks Allah in the good times and the trials. Peace and blessings be on Muhammad. Evil will be the end for those who committed evil. Do you think your reputation before God has left you victorious? Have you not read in the Quran that us granting them respite is good for their souls? Rather, we grant them a respite so that they may add to their sins for a painful chastisement. And then she says, Yazid, you will never erase the love from the hearts of those people who love us. We see her strength, we see her courage, we see her loyalty to her Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and then after to Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. Imam Hussein was her brother, Imam Sajjad was her nephew, but they were the Imam of her time. We look at Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha, and in my next question to you, dear sister, is what are the lessons that we can learn from her, especially as the women of today's generation, raising our young youth, raising our young girls? What can we learn from her?
You know, there's a lot of lessons we can learn from Lady Zainab alayhi salam, her religion, her worship, even in the most darkest moments of her life, of losing her brother, her family. You know, she continued to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, her bravery, her modesty, you know, the religion. Actually, we can learn the religion from a woman's point of view from Lady Zainab alayhi salam. We can learn a lot. But the thing is that today, is not much often, Lady Zainab alayhi salam is not much often, you know, narrated about and mentioned. We do need deep studies, you know, to study everything about her life, even those few narrations that we have. And actually, like, we need to research about her and bring a psychologist to actually examine it from their point of view. The history as well, history teachers, those who are well known in knowledge of history, to actually know how to make books and curriculums so that we can learn from her. We can, you know her lifestyle in the academic knowledge, because Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wasalam, they're not just for religion. Even if we take them and we study them academically, we are able to reach a lot of knowledge and learn a lot from her. I do believe that, you know, Lady Zainab alayhi salam, she herself inspired me in the Husseini journey. You know, how to be a woman, how to be brave, how to be modest, especially in the lifetime, especially we're born in the West country, we're raised in the West country, we have other influencers. And yet our parents, it was so difficult for them to raise us in public schools and then yet try to bring religion to us because someone else is already influencing us. But with Zainab alayhi salam, her hijab, her modesty, I was able to seek the light. And she was the first, you know, lady and the first of Ahlul Bayt who actually I became and took her as a role model. Even in public speaking, you know, she public speak in front of, you know, in the courtyard of Yazid, in Kufa, in Sham, in Medina, her Lady Fatima alayhi salam, with her hijab, with her modesty. And today you'd always see people that tell you, you know, you shouldn't public speak. You shouldn't be a scholar. You shouldn't learn. You shouldn't, you know, preach about Islam. And it's like, why? It's like, because you're a woman, you shouldn't. You should be at home covering your face, for example. And then you'd have, you know, the social media. Social media is our weapon. Today on social media, they're conquering the woman through makeup and beauty and even the hijab that is not really hijabi. And when we stand and speak about Ahlul Bayt, how Lady Zainab alayhi salam was, they say, no, you shouldn't. Okay, first implement that ideology over the doctors and say that there shouldn't be a woman who's a doctor. Then go to the nurses and say that there shouldn't be a woman who's a nurse because she's interacting with men. Then you should go to the teachers and say that there shouldn't be a woman who teaches because there's boys there as well and there's men teachers. Then you should go into public and say that there shouldn't be a woman exiting out of the public because she's interacting with men. Then come to us who are public speaking in the name of Islam and Ahlul Bayt. Today, the weapon is social media. They're using this weapon to conquer our daughters and our girls. If we don't use the same weapon to go out there and preach about Ahlul Bayt and Lady Zainab alayhi salam, no woman would be, you know, inspired today. Because I had a friend once who would tell me, I would never listen to a man who would speak about hijab. And I would tell her why. She would say, I would never listen to a scholar, a sheikh or a sayyid who would speak about hijab. And I would say, why to her? And she says, because they don't know what we endure. They don't know what we go through. They don't even wear it. They don't practice it. It's like having a man speaking to us about pregnancy. You don't know how it feels like. You don't know what you endure. She says, but I would listen to a woman when you speak about hijab. Because I know that you've wore it and you've lived in the West and you've suffered and you have your own experiences and I can learn from you, but I can't learn from a man. No way he can talk to me about hijab. I would not listen to it. And this is where we learned from Lady Zainab alayhi salam, is that she inspires us. She inspires us a lot. Today, when you want to wear the hijab, you would reflect back to her. With the love that we have towards her, we strengthen our hijab. With the love that we have towards her, we're like, oh, she's a woman. And she was a scholar. And she was knowledgeable. And she spoke in the public in front of Yazid. And she was this and her worship. And she was that. And then we become taking her as a role model from a woman. And likewise, we do that today, that we want to inspire the women around the world, how we were inspired by Lady Zainab alayhi salam. It's your job, it's your mission right now to be inspired by her, to speak about Islam and Ahlul Bayt, and not to have anyone else as your role models. She's the best role models in hijab, in modesty, in knowledge, in her worship. And this is what we can learn from Lady Zainab alayhi salam. From the few narrations we have, we can learn a lot from her.
We often underestimate the hijab that we have. Hijab, not just the physical hijab that we have, but the social hijab that we have. And often we think that the hijab that we wear is a barrier from us going out into the outside world and speaking, going out into the outside world and doing the jobs that we do. We need to teach our girls especially the beauty of this hijab. And I'll give you a very small example about my daughter, who in her school, in her year group, is the only one who wears hijab. And she often says to me, it's hard because in the summer months, it's hot. In Ramadan, in the summer months, she's fasting, it's hot. And she says her friends ask her about the hijab, but she has seen every female in her life, from myself, her grandmothers, her aunties, all wearing hijab, which is why she has the strength to be the only one in her year group in school to be wearing that hijab. And she wears it with pride. And I remind her every day that this is your identity. Even in the workplace, in the medical field that I work in, and I go in my full hijab, it has never prevented me from rising in my field. Or when we as presenters and speakers and lecturers come and speak about Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha, often the media and the West, we are a threat to them because we are covered, yet we speak the truth and we speak the justice of Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha. And we forget often, we talk about the physical trials that Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha went through on Ashura and after Ashura in that treacherous journey. We forget about the emotional and the mental and the psychological strength that she had to endure in order to complete the mission of Hussein, in order to complete the mission of her father and her grandfather, in order to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We forget that emotional strength that she must have had to face to endure everything that she did. So when we in the West, we wear our hijab and we speak, we inspire other young females who perhaps are not wearing the hijab or who perhaps don't know how to come out and continue in the Western society that we are living in and feel perhaps a little bit embarrassed. We use Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha as our inspiration, as our guide, as that perfect light and beacon of strength, courage, and patience. Now, as we come to the end of our episode, we look at her relationship between her two children, Hazrat An and Hazrat Muhammad, those two young souls that gave their life for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And then on the night of Ashura, she comes up to her brother Imam Hussein alayhi salam and Sayyida Zainab says, "Oh my brother, if women were permitted to fight, I would have courted death to save you. But it is not allowed, except my sacrifice of my sons for you." And narrations tell us that she never once cried for her two sons, An and Muhammad. In fact, it was her honor to give An and Muhammad for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. She cried over Imam's son, Hazrat Ali Akbar. She mourned his death. She never mourned the death of An and Muhammad. Why? For her brother Hussein alayhi salam. In these last few moments before we end our episode, let us look at narrations. What does narrations tell us about Hazrat An, Hazrat Muhammad, and how Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha gave these two precious sons of hers as a gift to Imam Hussein alayhi salam?
You know, if you were to read in one of the narrations, now there are several narrations in the Maqatil. One of the narrations that narrate tells us that Lady Zainab alayhi salam, and as I said that there's a lot of different narrations, but this narration says that before Imam Hussein alayhi salam sends out his sons to battle, Lady Zainab alayhi salam, the narration says she got Muhammad and On. And this narration shows you that they were not old, they were young children. She brushed their hair and she put them eyeliner. And this is the type of eyeliner that they put back in the day for the health of the eye. And it was normal to put that. So she put their eyeliner on. She brushed their hair. She dressed them new clothing, nice clothing, and she dressed their swords. And the reason behind that is that Ahlul Bayt alayhimu salatu wasalam, every time they wanted to present to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala something, they'd present it in the best forms, the best quality. They would not present anything that was not with good quality. So the appearance of their look was the best quality, the best clothing. She brushed their hair, she dressed them their clothing, and she dressed them their swords. And she came to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And she said to them, allow my children to battle and sacrifice themselves. Imam Hussein alayhi salam didn't accept. He refused. He said no. Maybe their father, Abdullah bin Ja'far, does not accept. And she said to them, my husband told me that, oh Zainab, if ever Hussein would need a sacrifice, allow my sons to sacrifice. She said, he accepted. He's the one who told me, if you were in need, these are my sons. Imam Hussein alayhi salam did not accept. The narration says that she kept begging him and telling him, with the love of your mother Fatima, with the love of your grandfather Rasulullah, with the love of your father Ali, with the love of your brother Hassan, accept my kids to sacrifice. And the narration says after she said that, he accepted. And when they went into the battle, the army of Umar ibn Sa'ad does not know them because they are from Kufa. The majority of the army, the people were from Kufa. They do not know Ahlul Bayt. But who knew them was Umar ibn Sa'ad. Two young, handsome boys. He said, Ajaban lirraham. How can Zainab surprisingly sacrifice her two young children for Hussein? Even those, she sacrificed them. What great love she had towards Hussein and had towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that everything she sacrificed for, even her two young souls, two young sons. The narration says that when they began to battle, no one dared to come close to them and kill them from close. They are Bani Hashim. They're brave. They're strong. No one could battle them, even if they were young. So from far, one of the soldiers of Umar ibn Sa'ad threw an arrow on Muhammad, and he said to On, I will follow you in a bit. And then another arrow hit them from far, not from close. The narration says when Imam Hussein alayhi salam saw this, he dragged them, but his back was bending. He could not lift his back up. They were not tall, but because his back was narrowed, it was bending. He couldn't lift it, and he would drag them until he brought them to the tents. The narration says every woman exited out of the tents, screaming, mourning, crying, illa Zainab. Only Zainab, she remained in the tents because she feared to look on them, look in their eyes and see them martyred, that she would cry, and if she cried, her ajr would be minus. خافت أن ينقص أجرها. She didn't want her ajr from presenting to Allah, from giving to Allah, to be minus from crying in those tears. The narration says Zainab was out when anyone was martyred from Imam Hussein's children, from anyone. But when it came to her sons, she remained inside the tents. She did not come out, and she did not mourn, and she did not cry. And this shows us how she had, ikhlas, piety, and how she sacrificed, for Imam Hussein and for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sincerely. She didn't even want to cry and say, I sacrificed them, I gave them, they were martyred. No, they were for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And from this as well, we can learn from Zainab alayhi salam.
Narrations tell us that when Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha finally took the journey back to Medina, and she saw the two small prayer mats of Hazrat On and Hazrat Muhammad, this is the time where she wept for her children. Up till then, her journey, her sacrifice, her patience was only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When she came back, she was of course a mother. And that's when she remembered her 2 children. I end by a small hadith by Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha. And in a beautiful narration, she says, which is an inspiration to us, especially as women. She says, with an army handcuffed, I conquered Sham, like Khaybar. With heartbroken orphans, fought oppression, like Haydar. And inshallah, we use Sayyida Zainab salamullahi alayha as our inspiration, not just in this holy month, but in every holy month that we have in our Islamic calendar. Not just on the day of Ashura, but every single day. We look at the sacrifice of Zainab. We look at her as our role model. We look at her as our patience, and we look at her as our strength. And we gain inspiration from her to be strong women, to be strong females, to be strong advocates, to be those strong supporters of Imam Mahdi, Ajalallahu Ta'ala Faraj Sharif. As we know, in Imam's army, there will be females as well. And inshallah, we are amongst those who can answer the call to Imam Mahdi, Ajalallahu Ta'ala Faraj Sharif. Thank you, dear sister, for joining us. This was a hard topic to discuss, but a very important topic to discuss, not just for us females, but for males and for our children as well, especially. Inshallah, we will be back for another episode, and we use this month to gain closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our beloved Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. Thank you, dear viewers at home, for watching us. We pray for the shifa of all the marid around the world, and we pray for the eternal safety and quick reappearance of our beloved Imam Zamana alayhi salam. Until next time, dear viewers, thank you for watching. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.